Welcome to Nutmeg Chatter, the radio program. I'm your host, J. Timothy Quirk. In the downtown section of a former mill town turned cultural hub of New England resides a mighty force of communication and civic engagement. I'm referring to WAPJ, Torrington, Connecticut's community radio station. Being a community station means it is a non-profit organization. It is non-commercial and is designed to provide entertainment, information, and a forum for individuals within the community who volunteer their time, talent, and effort to bring value to their listeners. Today on Nutmeg Chatter, we visit with John Ramsey, station manager for WAPJ, who was recently inducted into the Connecticut Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame. As of this recording, he is one of only 12 individuals who have been so honored. So now, it's time to pull up a chair, have ourselves a chat on Nutmeg Chatter. Welcome back to Nutmeg Chatter. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. Presented for you is the interview with John Ramsey, station manager of WAPJ. So could you tell me a little bit about the history of WAPJ?
Sure. The station was the brainchild of Attorney Sullivan and Dr. Temkin, two philanthropists and movers and shakers that had been active in Torrington for decades. Before 1990, when they thought over lunch, they decided that Torrington should have a radio station again. Originally, the city had two AM stations. Back in the 50s and 60s, there were WSNG and WLCR. WLCR went out of business in the 60s, leaving only one station in WSNG, which is still with us, but they were sold in the 80s to a station in Hartford, to Buckley Broadcasting. And they do a good job of broadcasting, but they're not local. The programming all originates out of Bloomfield on WSNG, and there's really not much of a connection with the community at all, which left Torrington without a local radio voice. And these two gentlemen thought that it would be important to have a radio station on in town again. They thought that originally in 1990, and it took them 7 years to convince the federal government, convince the FCC to get a station.
Wow. Now, taking 7 years to do anything shows that there is a huge commitment to the idea and to the community. But obviously they felt it was worth it, right?
They thought it was important, and it's unique because it's probably one of the few times in the history of American broadcasting where a couple of people decided to put a radio station on, but they didn't have a specific idea what the programming should be. They weren't jazz lovers. They weren't classical buffs. They didn't want to bring opera to the community. They just wanted to bring good radio to the town. They didn't care. They thought there should be a community radio station and a community voice on the radio for Torrington and for Greater Torrington, really. But they didn't. They had a vision of other people doing the programming. They didn't want to be on the air, and they didn't have any specific programming ideas, which is pretty cool, I think.
That's amazing. It's an idea of having a vision. Right?
Exactly. As opposed to doing something for yourself, because I'm a jazz buff and I want to play jazz on the radio. That wasn't the case. They just wanted to give back to the community. They had some money left over from another nonprofit project that they were doing, and it took them 7 years of fighting with the FCC because the FM dial is pretty crowded, and the FCC has a very archaic way of allocating frequencies. So it took them from 1990 to 1997 to get the FCC to finally allocate 89.9 for the Torrington community.
That's amazing. Now, and I'm going to talk about the other station on the dial that also carries WAPJ in just a few moments, but I want to stick with the history. So in 97, where was WAPJ located? I know it was in Torrington, but where specifically?
Originally, the plan was to put it in the new Torrington High School, which was being built in the mid-90s, but it took so long to get the station licensed, the space was not available anymore. So they were stuck. Dr. Temkin and Mr. Sullivan had the radio station license, but no place to put it. So the Litchfield County Commission on Higher Education, which was a booster organization to help UConn Torrington, was able to work out an arrangement to put the station at Torrington's UConn branch.
Really? So it was there first at the Yukon branch. And how long was it there, John?
It was there for 3 or 4 years, and it was an ideal situation in the sense that the space was provided to us for free because, among other things, the station promoted Yukon and what Yukon was doing. It was certainly, Yukon has always been good at tying in with the community and helping the community. And the facilities were really nice. They actually had that tower. They've got that huge radio tower behind the campus,
Sure.
which tied in perfectly. The downside was, and a lot of professors and other people involved with Yukon were on the air, so it was a great give and take. The downside was the school's campus was only open from about 7 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening, never in the evening, never on weekends. And trying to run a volunteer organization with no weekend and no evening coverage, which is when most volunteers are available,
Sure.
It was a challenge.
That makes sense. And so they had to find a different venue. Where did they go next?
They went to they stayed at Yukon until Yukon needed the space. This Yukon was growing in the early 2000s. So in 2002, I believe they moved to the Nutmeg Ballet. Nutmeg was just undergoing a renovation, and space was provided in the basement with 2 really nice studios and an office for the radio station to exist there. And they were there for 3 or 4 years. And then the Nutmeg needed the space, and we moved over here to 40 Water Street, which is the building owned by the Temkin family. Dr. Temkin's dental practice was upstairs until a few years ago, and here we remain.
And just as a special programming note, it should be noted that the Nutmeg Ballet Conservatory is a sponsor of WAPJ programming. As we continue the discussion, so you have now moved to Water Street. How long have you been here in Water Street?
Since 2005. And it's an ideal location. It's a great neighborhood. It's a very busy street, which sometimes the listeners can hear noise of fire trucks going by in the background because the firehouse is right up the road. But we've got a storefront studio. Stations back in the 50s and 60s used to be in parkades and in shopping centers, but that's all long gone away now because stations are all corporate owned and they're in big glass towers in Hartford and New Haven. But we're right here. People can literally walk by and look in while we're doing shows.
That's one of the most, one of my favorite things about WAPJ is to be able to drive on at any time on Water Street, and when there's a show on and there's a live person here, you can look in, you can see them, you can turn on your radio dial to that while you're in the car, and you can see them put on their show, and I think that's great. I really love that part of the community atmosphere. Do you think that helps, being physically located in town where somebody can literally walk by?
Yeah, it really ties us in with the community. It gives us visibility, but it also gives the listener accessibility. It's not unusual for somebody to stop by and donate a CD, donate some cash, or bring in a lost dog or lost cat announcement, which we'll put on the air.
That's amazing, and you do put on so many announcements here for on WAPJ, which is community radio. There's some of the history behind WAPJ. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about John Ramsey and his involvement in the radio industry. There's an entire, we could talk a week about that, but we're going to try to get as much as we can in the time that we have. So you are listening to WAPJ. We'll be back in just a few moments. And we're back. We're talking with John Ramsey. John Ramsey was recently inducted into the Connecticut Broadcaster Association Hall of Fame. Only one of 12 individuals who were so honored. We have been talking about WAPJ community radio. And now, John, I'd like to talk to you about your involvement in WAPJ. How did you first get involved?
Well, I got involved with the radio station in 1996, about a year before the station went on the air, when Dr. Temkin, through a mutual friend, I found out that Dr. Temkin, one of the station founders, had this license from the FCC to build a station, and that they had the equipment and the facilities, the space at Yukon, but they didn't have anybody that knew how to build a radio station. And I'm a broadcast engineer by trade, so I met with Dr. Temkin and kind of fell in love with the concept and really embraced him as a philanthropist, really got to know him and all the wonderful things he and his family had done for the community. So I volunteered on a pro bono basis to build the radio station for him.
That's amazing. Now, how did you develop your interest in radio broadcasting, in radio engineering?
Back when I was a kid, my dad came home one day, probably when I was 8 or 9 years old, with a crystal radio set. He'd bought at Radio Shack or somewhere, and we built that together, and And I just had a fascination with the technology, but also I've been a radio listener. I had an older brother that listened to rock and roll music back in the 60s, which I liked too. And I've always been fascinated by radio. I think radio is an important medium, and the theater of the mind is a very powerful thing. So I liked radio and I liked the technology. So I got into broadcast engineering in the early 70s, as a avocation.
As your taste in radio evolved over time in the sense of, I assume from when you were 8 to now, changed dramatically, but do you like to listen to rock and roll? Do you like to listen to jazz? Do you like to listen to talk radio? What specifically about the medium and the genre of radio interests you?
I think these days, music is certainly what brought me into radio, and the radio business has changed, and the sound of radio has changed in the last 40 or 50 years, certainly. But I listen more to talk radio now of all kinds, predominantly NPR, but also commercial talk radio as well, because I'm very much interested in what's going on in the world and in the nation. Now more than ever before, but I've always had a passion. I always like information and to hear what other people think. I often listen to people that have viewpoints totally different than my own, because I think it keeps you, in tune with what's going on. If you can hear what the other side is saying, you challenge your own viewpoints, and maybe those evolve as well a little bit, and you can be a better citizen and a better member of society if you're well informed. So I think talk radio, not just the right wing stuff you hear on commercial radio, but NPR and other sources too, are probably my main passion, as much as I love music too.
Makes sense. And having an interest in radio from such a young age, learning how to build one is what you're telling me and describing that. Did that somehow lend itself to any part-time jobs that eventually led to a full-time? Well,
I actually did some paid announcing on the air. I actually worked for a country and western station in West Hartford area back in high school, and I have a lot of respect for country and western music, but I don't have a passion for it. So having me do a top 40 country and western show, playing Conway Twitty and Tanya Tucker was a little bit odd. My friends kind of thought that was funny, but I realized that my best place is on the other side of the microphone, not in front of it.
Ah, okay.
Because as much as I love music, I'm not really talented as far as announcing goes, or that's not my thing. So working behind the scenes technically made a lot more sense for me.
And so as a radio engineer, you have worked at a wide number of stations in Connecticut. Is that correct?
Yeah, my passion has always been non-commercial radio, stations that operate as a public interest and as a community resource, but those stations generally don't pay much, if anything. Like at WAPJ, nobody gets paid here. It's all volunteer. It's all pro bono. So I've worked in commercial radio at stations like WDRC and WCCC and WTIC, doing engineering work for them.
How has radio changed, would you say, in the past, let's say, 5 years?
5 years, we haven't seen as many big changes as the last 10 or 15 years.
Okay.
They back 10 or 15 years ago, they deregulated radio dramatically through a change in the Communications Act. Prior to, I think, 1998, a person or a business couldn't own more than 12 AM, 12 FM, and 12 TV stations. That was a lot, and not many people owned that many. They deregulated that you could own an unlimited number of radio and television stations, but they limited how many you could own in each town. So you ended up having companies like CBS Radio and iHeart owning hundreds, or in the case of iHeart, 1,000 radio stations. And that resulted in the kind of demise of local radio, because there's an economy of scale. All McDonald's are pretty much the same because they save money. They don't have specific menus. They all look the same. They have the same seats, the same cash registers, because that's the way you save money by doing things in a large scale. When you do that with radio, the programming suffers, I think.
And so that's why you're interested in community radio, because there's such a wide variety.
I mean, the two things that people say they want from radio historically, in surveys going back decades and in surveys as recently as months ago, they want localism and they want companionship. And when you put those two things together, if you have a live person on the radio as opposed to an automated system that things are recorded in advance, when you've got somebody doing radio live from the local community, you're fulfilling both needs, and people like that.
We're talking with John Ramsey here at WAPJ Radio. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the induction into the Connecticut Broadcaster Association Hall of Fame. So we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. I'm here with John Ramsey, the station manager of WAPJ, but there is so much more. He was recently inducted into the Connecticut Broadcaster Association Hall of Fame, only one of 12 individuals as of January 2017 who have been so honored. John, could you tell me a little bit about that night? How wonderful was that for you?
Well, it was unbelievable. It was totally an unexpected honor. I got the phone call from the president of the Connecticut Broadcast Association on April Fool's Day. And I work with him on different projects, on different committees. So when he called me, I said, Mike, you're kidding me, right? When he told me that I was being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I really thought it was an April Fool's Day joke.
Wow.
And he said, no, I'm being serious. I said, well, call me back tomorrow and tell me that. But I was very, very honored to be up there with people like Denise DeCenzo. I've worked really hard in the broadcasting business, but I do not feel worthy of being inducted into the Hall of Fame. So it was a real pleasure and a real privilege.
It's a great testament to what you have given to Connecticut radio to be able to honor you in that way, to be able to recognize all the hard work that you have done. Because as we've talked about in our prior segment on this Black Tie Lunchbox program, you've done a lot of work pro bono, including all of the work here for WAPJ. WAPJ Torrington Community Radio is all volunteer. And so the individuals that you hear on the program are all non-paid volunteers, and they are doing it because they love what they do. Either they love the music, what they do, or they love being able to share information to the local community in their particular way, in their particular style. That's something that interests them. And you have been doing this for a very long time and helping others share their messages.
Well, yeah, I enjoy working with people. I enjoy helping people learn about broadcasting. I always learn in the process of teaching broadcasting. I always learn more about people and what they like in radio, and it's a real pleasure to get people involved as broadcasters.
Is there a way for individuals who are interested in helping out WAPJ for them to do so?
Sure. There are a couple of different ways. If you'd like to get involved either behind the scenes or on the air, we have an orientation program that tells you more about the rights and responsibilities of station membership as a volunteer, and you can just contact us through the WAPJ.org webpage and let us know just email us, let us know of your interest. Also, we are listener supported in part, and in February we're going to be having our first ever fund drive, first ever this year fund drive, trying to raise $7,500.
That's important. What's important for, I think, listeners to know is that with WAPJ, their budget is very small, and it goes to the basics because they're not paying for some of for the content. But they have to pay for license fees, so that way the musicians and that who have performed the music will get paid for that. And of course, there's building, maintenance, insurance, and all that. So the budget is very small, and so the ask, if you will, to be able to fund drive is also very small.
Sure, exactly.
That's important. So that, and I just want to confirm, they can. There's going to be a fund drive. Will people be able to pay online? Will they be able to call in? They can call the radio station, or they can just go to the WAPJ.org website, and there's a button on the upper right-hand corner that says Donate, and then you can donate with using a credit card or PayPal, or they can just mail us a check at any time. Now, for ways that people can listen, we've already talked about 89.9 WAPJ, and we've just mentioned WAPJ.org, which you can listen online through that. You can also listen online through TuneIn. I understand. Right. There's something called Shoutcast. Sure. And yep. I think people can listen in there. And then there's also 105.1, correct? Yes. Let's talk about that to wrap things up. Tell me about 105.1. Well, we're lucky that we have two different frequencies. When we first went on the air, we had 89.9, and that antenna is located up on Highland Avenue, which is one of the highest spots in town. It's on one of the towers up there, and it gives us a pretty wide coverage, but because it's so high, there was kind of a cone of silence in downtown Torrington. You couldn't hear us very well. You could hear us in New Hartford. You could hear us actually in Avon at times, but you couldn't hear it in downtown Torrington, particularly in the steel frame buildings. So we added 105.1. We went back to the FCC and told them about the problem and got a license in 2008 for 105.1. The antenna is right on top of our building here on Water Street, and we cover 3 or 4 mile radius of the downtown area with a really strong signal. So it complements the other signal as well. Okay, when we come back, we're going to just conclude our conversation with John Ramsey, who's the station manager of WAPJ, and also an honoree as being inducted into the Connecticut Broadcaster Association Hall of Fame. Just a few moments, we'll be talking about some of the legacy that we can look back on in terms of the history of WAPJ. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back. I'm J. Timothy Quirk. I'm speaking with John Ramsey. John Ramsey is the station manager for WAPJ. He was also inducted into the Connecticut Broadcaster Association Hall of Fame. John, we've been talking about WAPJ Torrington Community Radio, and we've been talking about some of the benefits that community radio has. We've talked about the history. I'd like to talk about some of the programs that are on WAPJ currently, and how long they've been on and what they've been doing for the community. I'd like to first start off with perhaps the keynote, if you will, program, the Miscellaneous Morning Show with Barry and Holly. How long has that show been on the air?
Well, they've been on 5 days a week since 2012. They both had been doing a show together 1 day a week for several years before that. I think Barry's been with the station for probably 10 or 11 years now. But when we heard them both on together 1 day a week back in 2012, when I first became station manager, I said, what a great combination. I'm not a fan of two-person shows on community radio stations because you have to have the right formula. If one person talks on top of the other, if one person doesn't listen to what the other one's saying and repeats them, it's hard to do a two-person show well consistently. But I heard the two of them together, and the chemistry was just incredible. And I said, how about you guys doing a 5 day a week show? And they said, what? For free? No, they said yes. They were glad to do it.
That's fantastic because I listen to the program and I think they do have that great synergy. And what I like about the program as well is that they're able to bring people on from the community to talk about the different things that are coming up. They have a segment with Lynn Gellermino,
sure,
Warner Theater. I know they've interviewed Sharon Dante of the Nutmeg Ballet Conservatory in the past. They've had many different people on of varying interests within the arts and culture in Torrington, and I think that's been wonderful. What was it about Barry and Holly's chemistry that surprised you? Like, was there any particular moment that you heard that you recall, or was it just an overall feeling?
Well, being in the business for a long time, I kind of know what I like, and it's hard to quantify, but I think that they both individually sounded good. They had good voices. They had good delivery. What they talked about collectively and individually was apropos, because the trouble with you get amateurs on the air, and I say they're amateurs because they're not paid, they're volunteers, sometimes people can just ramble on and talk about boring stuff. They both seem to understand the idea of the station's mission being community-based and trying to do good things to the community. They both certainly knew a lot about the music. They complement each other with their musical knowledge. And again, the fact that they were able to have the dialogue without stepping on each other, without interrupting each other, was really something that's very rare. There's professionals that can do that. You've heard morning shows with two people, but it doesn't usually work out well with people that aren't professionally trained. And yet I heard them and I said, this is what we want.
Wonderful. And then following their program on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays is the Feel Good Show with Jacques Williams. How long has that program been on?
You got me on that one. I think he's been on a regular basis probably for 4 or 5 years, and he's been on the station longer than that. But he's been in that time slot since Barry and Holly started doing the morning show, and it's a very unique show, and he brings a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, and he's got a lot of connections in the community, which he ties in with both promoting community events and also bringing in musicians and entrepreneurs from the community to interview them on the air, which is something that a community station should do.
Absolutely. I've been very lucky and fortunate to have been interviewed by both Barry and also Jacques on their respective programs, which was really a wonderful opportunity. So thank them both for it. What other programs do you think the radio listener from Black Tie Lunchbox might be interested in hearing about? I understand there is a program that goes on right before ours called The Hotspot, correct?
Correct. It goes on after yours.
Oh, after
right after yours. And the Darcy does that show, and it's a lot of community involvement. Like, so she showcases community businesses, nonprofit organizations. She plays some music and does a great job just tying things in with the greater Torrington area.
That's wonderful. So that comes on before the Black Tie Lunchbox program. So hopefully people will tune in and listen to that, and then listen to the Black Tie Lunchbox program. That'd be wonderful. John, what do you think the legacy of WAPJ is going to be 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out? What do you hope to have for people to see?
Well, I think our biggest accomplishment is that we have brought back local radio and radio the way it used to be. I hear all the time from people that discover the station, and not just local folks. The last time we did a fundraiser, which was 2015, we received donations from 13 states because of our online streaming. It's one thing to listen to a station from another state. It's something else to donate money to it.
Absolutely.
So we must be doing something right if we get that type of following. But I think the comment I hear most often is that you're doing radio like radio used to be done. Radio that is entertaining, but also compassionate and provocative, and that is talking about issues and promoting community events and doing good things for the community. So I think our legacy, I think we've done that, and I hope we're going to continue to do that. I think that will be our legacy, to show people how good radio can be.
Well, having gone through the orientation for WAPJ, I can tell you that your mission is communicated very effectively. There's been the volunteers who were here, of which there were many, representing many different genres of music, many different formats. They were all here with a common message and a common purpose, that they valued what WAPJ did, and they value it so much that they wanted to donate their time to help others achieve their goals and achieve their success and be able to communicate their messages through WAPJ. It's an amazing resource for the community.
It really is a grassroots organization. We joke that everybody that's on the staff has drunk the Kool-Aid, but it really is a labor of love. That they've all taken the commitment to devote their time. They have to spend money to pay for gas to come in here. Some of them are traveling from out of the area, and they have made a commitment to try and bring good radio back to the Torrington area.
John, I want to thank you for being the guest, the very first guest on the WAPJ version of the Black Tie Lunchbox program. I'm very happy to be a part of the WAPJ community. For more information about WAPJ, they should go to the internet, and what should they type in?
Two different things. They could go to our website, wapj.org, or if they are a Facebook user, just type in WAPJ on Facebook, and you'll go to our Facebook page. Both of them have lots of information on how to get involved, how to donate, but more importantly, the schedule of the programming.
So they can like WAPJ on Facebook. They should also follow the WAPJ Twitter handle, correct? And they should listen to the program either on 89.9 FM or 105.1, or streaming at the many different venues that we've mentioned. Thank you for listening to Nutmeg Chatter, the radio program with J. Timothy Quirk. I want to thank my guest, John Ramsey, and I want to thank you for listening. Some of the music has been provided by the Jingle Punks, courtesy of YouTube royalty-free music. Find Nutmeg Chatter on Facebook and give us a like. Also, check out nutmegchatter.com. Please enjoy some more quality programming on WAPJ, Torrington Community Radio.